Aitken. I'm creative director and one of the founders at Axis. And today we're going to be talking about cinematics in general a little bit, but concentrating on the work we did for Halo 5 Guardians, which we completed last summer. So just a little bit about Axis. So we've been going for about 15 years now. Started off with 4 of us in somebody's back room in Dunfermline in Scotland. 15 years later, we've got about 150 people working for us across 3 sites. We're doing all sorts of work. We're doing feature-length animation, commercials, idents, visual effects for television and film, ride films. So we've kind of diversified into lots of little branches here and there. But I guess we're still most known for our work on cinematics, trailers, and animation for games. And that's certainly what I've spent the vast majority of my career kind of doing. Most notably, Dead Island in 2012, I guess, was our kind of breakthrough moment in many ways. That one went completely viral for some reason. So yeah, just to talk about cinematics in a general sense, because sometimes if you spend all your life kind of doing these things, it's a slightly kind of weird market to be in, because it doesn't quite have the kind of mainstream reach that something like feature animation or film visual effects does. And I guess it sort of sits somewhere in the middle of those two, if I can call them genres, in a way. You know, what we're doing is still animation. It's not supposed to be photoreal, though often it can be quite kind of realistic. But generally, it's always kind of stylized. One of the kind of fun things about it, I guess, is we get to do kind of genre animation, you know, perhaps aimed at an older audience, where most of the commercial avenues for doing animation are mostly aimed at kind of family audiences. So if you're like me, if you're a big kind of genre fan, you know, that's kind of really neat. I think the other great thing, just in terms of working on these types of projects, is we generally kind of enjoy quite a high level of creative involvement. Oftentimes, you know, we work with agencies, studios themselves, publishers, marketing departments. And there's times definitely where we'll get given a project more or less kind of fully formed. The much more usual situation is that we're going out and pitching the actual idea. And a lot of our job, especially kind of my role, I guess, is about making sure that when we pitch those ideas, that we kind of understand the brands we're pitching them to, that we understand the games that we're making these things for. Just to show you, I'm going to flick through a couple of examples of projects we've done, which I think shows kind of, these are all game projects, but they show kind of quite a wide variety of different styles. So we're not all of our projects we aren't trying to kind of come up with some in-house sort of style. It's always photorealistic. Sometimes we're going kind of very stylized. This is a project we did for Crackdown 3 recently for Microsoft. Another one for League of Legends, where this wasn't even a trailer so much. It was more kind of an animated companion piece. The guys who make League of Legends like doing these little things for the kind of fans. That was a really fun project, very, very kind of stylized. Grey Goo, which is maybe more the sort of traditional kind of semi-kind of realistic approach. Dead Island 2. And this is maybe more kind of the traditional kind of game trailer stuff, which we did for Call of Duty, a DLC called Exo-Zombies. Just chatting a little bit more about that, you know, what are game clients looking for? What is our job? And I think that the first thing to kind of understand is that we're kind of working within an established world. You know, what we're doing is generally either enhancing the game or marketing the game, but the game's still the kind of main event. So often our clients are essentially looking for a kind of more polished realization of an already existing art direction. And that's kind of important. I think on every job we do, we try quite hard to make sure that we're not imposing our style in the work, that we're kind of picking up what the client's doing and taking that forwards. They're often looking to, I mean, especially on the trailer side, they're looking to develop kind of themes and concepts and kind of sell a new game either to a new audience or maybe to re-excite an existing kind of fan base. For cinematics, which maybe, you know, take place within game, it's generally about kind of developing, you know, backstory and narrative, and often kind of delivering exposition, I guess, as well. I think all of these things, you can kind of sum them up as what we're trying to do is explore the game world in ways that add depth, and doing that in a way that gameplay kind of doesn't. And I know there's still a lot of controversy about, I think, cinematics in games. You know, a lot of players maybe don't like them. Personally, I think as long as they kind of do their job well, I kind of don't mind them at all, and I think they enhance the experience. And trailers as well. I mean, I think there's always a kind of tension with pre-rendered CG trailers where you're kind of advertising a game, and the tension there is about, what we are doing isn't actually the game. It's based in the kind of same world. But I think it's still the most effective way to deliver an impactful kind of message about something. And I think these days, games companies tend to deliver kind of gameplay trailers along with the kind of things we do. So if people want to see what the actual game looks like to play. But the fact of the matter is, it's much more effective route to do something, a little concept piece like the kind of things that we would do is going to tell a new audience, get them interested in that game a lot more quickly than, just another kind of gameplay trailer. Anyway, our kind of brief history with Halo, or sorry, not so brief. So actually, we originally, our first kind of brush with Halo is we pitched for Halo Reach. Can't remember when that was, 2006 or 7, I think, when Bungie was still making the franchise. I mean, we got down to the last 2 studios, but we didn't get that. But we did start a relationship with Microsoft Game Studios, which we worked on quite a few projects for them over the years. And in 2011, they kind of asked us to go and see 343 Industries in Seattle and talk about this new thing they had in development called Spartan Ops. So that pretty much swallowed up my entire life for 15 months. So Spartan Ops, for those who don't know, was a kind of series of 10 6-minute webisodes that got delivered weekly along with a bunch of new co-op missions that Microsoft were releasing for the game. So it was by far the biggest thing we'd done as a studio up to that point. 15 months, hundreds of assets, 60 minutes, 1,400 shots, I think we delivered altogether. Then later, the year after we delivered that, the Xbox One was being launched, and again, 343 got in touch with us to do a kind of advert for kind of where Halo was going to go on the Xbox One. So this was kind of an advert for Guardians, though I don't think it had that name explicitly at this point. And certainly some of the things we suggested in that trailer got changed a little bit by the time the game came out. But I think it's a great example of, people using the kind of things we do to kind of maintain interest in something even sort of well before the game's ready for public consumption. So that kind of leads us to Guardians. So we talked to, I think we first talked to them December or January. I think it was sort of early January last year. And whereas in Spartan Ops, actually, I think because 343 were kind of so busy with the main game, we actually kind of got quite a long leash just to go and kind of make something. And although we very much worked very, very closely with them on the script, kind of post that point, from storyboarding, concept art, previs, all the way through to final execution, they kind of really trusted us just to go off and make it without trying to kind of, interfere with that process a lot. But this time, I think Brian Goodrich, who's the cinematic director at 343, we had a meeting with those guys, and he was saying that, one of the things he really wanted to do this time was kind of get more involved and have a more kind of joined up approach to what they were doing. So we talked about having this much kind of closer relationship, and what we eventually kind of arrived at was that, Brian and his team would be doing a whole bunch of cinematics that would play throughout the game. But they wanted to go down a pre-rendered approach for the ones that kicked off the game from the ones that kind of finished it at the end. And particularly the sort of centerpiece, which I'll be kind of concentrating on today, I think was very much kind of Brian's kind of love child in a way. It was something he'd always wanted to do, and he saw this as an opportunity to kind of really make something that they hadn't done before. And, they were very much like, we want to work collaboratively with you guys. We don't just want you to sort of stray off and just make something. We want to make it with you. And that brought all sorts of kind of things we had to talk about, like how we work together. And I think we eventually arrived at that, most of the scenes that we did, we would kind of go down a traditional route where Microsoft would kind of script them, then we'd storyboard and make them. But this kind of main centerpiece, which was going to double as the launch trailer, Brian very much wanted to kind of be very involved with that. And so the animation was going to take place at 343, and we come along and kind of render the result. I'll kind of show you the first animatic they sent us just in a second, but essentially the kind of creative requirements for this sort of centerpiece were introducing a whole bunch of new characters. So in this game, rather than just playing Master Chief, you were playing actually two sides. You were playing Blue Team, which is kind of Master Chief's team of guys, and a new team called Team Osiris, which introduced a new character called Locke. And also there was a big emphasis on co-op play. So rather than playing by yourself as a kind of lone wolf, you always had a kind of team of buddies around you, whether that was your real buddies or the console kind of playing along with you. the goal of this piece was also to kind of set up the initial mission. So this piece kind of runs straight into you sort of starting to play the game. And everybody kind of, Brian very much wanted to be a kind of massive epic action set piece because it had to do double duty as the announced trailer. This was something that really wanted to grab, the attention of everybody. And, announce the new installment with a bang, create excitement. So this, I'm going to let this play. This is going to last me sort of four minutes or so. This is what 343 showed to us at this point. So they'd already kind of done some previs. So this is what we kind of based all the further discussions on.
Fire Team Osiris. Over the last 72 hours, 5 colonies have experienced identical events. Massive destruction. Forerunner in origin. Dr. Catherine Elizabeth Halsey has managed to contact us. She claims to have information on these attacks.
Halsey is currently in Covenant custody on the surface of Kamchatka. Your mission is to insert behind enemy lines, retrieve Halsey, and bring her back to Infinity. Dr. Halsey is accompanied by Covenant Supreme Leader Jules Dama. If you have the opportunity.
Understood, Commander. Good luck, Spartan Lock. Infinity out. Tracking check online?
Affirmative. Say, before we jump, does anyone want to say a few words?
The figure of God can hear how scared I am. So can everyone else. Lock, you buying the first round when we're done?
You ask, you buy. Fire Team Osiris, light is green.
So I can talk over it, or otherwise we'll be here all day. So it's kind of funny looking at this, because this was kind of their proof of concept, I guess, in terms of showing everybody internally and to us what they wanted to do. And despite the fact, obviously the character works based on really, really basic, almost kind of Lego models, it's amazing how much the finished result still kind of pretty much resembles this really early kind of proof of concept. So the scene is essentially two pieces. There's the part inside the Pelican where we kind of meet the new characters we're going to play, where we deliver all the kind of expositional aspects of what the mission's all about. But this is the piece we were all kind of concentrating on when we kind of started to see what it was they wanted us to do. As a slight aside, we've got a little bit of a history with people wanting to do massive unbroken camera moves. I think the first one we did was for Killzone way back in 2005. But we've done a few of them, and they're always kind of challenging. Though I think this one definitely took the biscuit. Once we started to realize, I think, what was really going to be involved, kind of doing all of this, like how many effects there were, how many character assets there were. And we didn't necessarily have a huge amount of time to do it. I think we were going to start in February, and I think we had to deliver at the end of July. So, and that's us out. So we all kind of looked at that, and sort of once we picked our jaws up off the floor in terms of, oh my God, how are we going to do this? We started looking at the challenges, and really starting to get to grips with this. How, what are the challenges, and how are we going to solve them? So I'm going to concentrate. I mean, the stuff in the Pelican at the start, I don't think phased us too much. That was all kind of, we're kind of good at doing that kind of stuff. We know how to do that. It was more that kind of big 3-minute piece down the mountain. That was the thing we were all talking about. So I talked before about Spartan Ops. We had, I don't know how many assets we had in Spartan Ops, but I think we got more assets in that one scene than we had in the whole Spartan Ops production. There's literally kind of hundreds of different enemy types. Different weapons, the actual terrain itself, like we got this huge coverage down right from the upper atmosphere right down onto a kind of mountain. So So the 3-minute unbroken traveling shot itself is a problem because there's no cuts. I mean, we use cuts all the time to help kind of, ease the production of scenes. I mean, if you're doing a simulation or something for an effect, if you've got a cut, generally that gives you a kind of boundary for how long you need that simulation to last. But here we needed sims that were going to go on for, thousands of frames in some cases. The sheer number of assets, and particularly how we're going to get all those assets into our pipeline. The large number of specific effects required. So at one point I did a kind of sort of storyboard breakdown going through that animatic and kind of checked off all the points where we needed some kind of effect, and that list got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then of course the whole collaborative thing they wanted to do, this cross studio pipeline, how are we going to make that work? And then finally, I think just from a rendering point of view, traditionally, I guess like a lot of other places, we render in lots of layers with different AOVs, and then we composite those all at the end because that gives us kind of more control of the look. But trying to do a scene like that, and again, where you don't have any kind of cuts, so you end up with kind of an enormous comp script. And particularly because we knew that there's going to be lots of snow involved and things getting thrown up in the atmosphere. There's going to be lots of volumetrics as well, and that was going to, that equal comp nightmare. So that had us scratching our chins a little bit as well, working out how to do that. So I'm going to go sort of plow through the kind of solutions we came up to those kind of primary problems, starting off with kind of assets. So the biggest initial obvious problem we had was, was how do we get all these assets into our pipeline in the amount of time we had. So what we actually found, and this was kind of handy that we'd worked closely with 343 before. So this isn't always the case. One thing 343 are really good at is packaging assets for outsourced guys like us. They work with us, Blur, Digit, kind of people like that all the time. So they're kind of used to doing that, and that isn't always the case. So we were kind of lucky there that they were already kind of prepared to deliver stuff very efficiently. So with each asset, we get an outsourced art package with test renders of what it should look like, all the textures, all the geometry we needed. And the other thing we found was that what they call their cinematic quality assets were actually pretty high quality. And once we looked at those closely, we went, well, maybe we can just use those directly. Normally, with game stuff, you tend to be in a position where you're taking in client assets and kind of rebuilding them substantially in kind of some way. So we thought, well, maybe we don't have to kind of do this in this job, and if we do, maybe we can be kind of judicious about it. So then we had to make some changes to our kind of asset pipeline. That allowed us to kind of really shorten down the amount of time it took to get each asset into our pipe. We also found that everybody's kind of moving to kind of physically based shader setup, particularly based, there's a kind of famous Disney paper on physically based rendering that everybody's kind of latching onto. So we also found our shader parameterizations were quite aligned in terms of when we both had metallicity. We were basing reflection on one kind of roughness parameter. So we actually found we could use our textures quite a lot of the time directly as well without having to redo those. Just had to remap that to our kind of shader inputs. Occasionally, for some of the key assets, the hero assets, we've got quite a procedural shading pipeline where we've got lots of little nice shortcuts for doing kind of like chipped edges and scratches and dings and stuff. So we could always layer a bit of that over the top as well where it was required. And the other great thing about going down this route was that we felt it kind of gave us a kind of workable route for how we were going to get data from 343 into our pipeline. And not just once, but regularly. We had to kind of do that multiple times during making this. Just to give you a quick example, a visual example. So this is 343's lock asset. As you can see there, I mean, that's thinking it's OpenGL shading, but still it looks pretty good. I mean, it's not like you can see many polygon edges there. So that's the kind of thing we were looking at and going, yeah, we can make that work. Their shading, which is looking really nice as well. Another view there, and then so this is a kind of us taking that asset, and after kind of literally 2 or 3 days, I think, on lock, getting it into rendering it in our Houdini mantra pipeline. And a lot of times we're using, even the normal maps in the game we were using, I think occasionally we were converting those to displacements. Normally we'd use displacements all the time rather than normal maps, but they actually worked really well. I think only in the faces was the one place we definitely kind of moved to displacements because of the subsurface scattering, particularly. Right, I'm going to talk over these. This is a very quick rundown to give you guys an idea of kind of like, all of these assets we were kind of ingesting. This is just a small selection of the character assets we were working on, and all of them are kind of quite complex models, sometimes with hair. There's loads of these kind of bad guys. This sort of turnaround thing you're seeing is a kind of standardized setup we've got. Everything looks a little bit too shiny, and that's kind of deliberate. It's a very kind of shiny studio environment we're lighting these in. That kind of gives us a kind of exaggerated sense of the reflective properties of our assets. We know they're not going to be quite as zingy looking like that once we actually get them in shot. I'll flick past that. So the same thing, we had a bunch of loads of kind of spaceships hanging in the atmosphere, some of those, and obviously there's some very famous Halo vehicles that we had to take over as well. The Banshee, the Wraith, the Ghost, etc. So these were all kind of very iconic Halo vehicles we needed to get right. And then, of course, weapons. What's Halo without guns? So we had lots of guns to put over as well. And we worked on this before. We knew what was expected. We knew what these things had to look like. And that's just a kind of, literally, there was about 7 times more assets. That was just crazy. Especially when you look at how many different previews we've got for this. It's literally over 100. So moving on in terms of, OK, we've got the assets in. That's kind of fine. But how are we actually going to deal with the animation? Because normally, what we do is, our assets are particularly set up to work within our pipeline. Our pipeline's based on a combination of Maya for animation, Houdini for rendering. So we've got quite a kind of proprietary workflow for how data comes from Maya and gets into Houdini. And there's Maya assets and Houdini assets either side of that pipeline that kind of know how to talk to each other, generally through Alembic caches. And they're not as general alembics. We actually we bake quite a lot of data into alembics so that things like shading become easier later on. So we had to change that a little bit. We looked at their scenes, and what 343 could deliver to us was kind of like a master scene with a whole bunch of asset references to the individual files. So what we found was we kind of could take the individual assets, cache those out to Alembic, and start the loop dev process on those. But for the actual scene animation, our normal tools wouldn't work in this sense. So we had to kind of modify a few things. So what we ended up doing was writing a couple of custom scripts that essentially would just go into the Maya scene, sort of spool through each reference, then write out a custom Alembic based on the reference namespace. And as long as that namespace stayed the same on each update, that was going to work. And give 343 their due. They kind of stuck to that. Then we modified our kind of standard HDA into a sort of custom one, which would kind of bring those caches into Houdini and then attach the shaders that the loop dev guys have been doing. So the other thing, that kind of worked quite well, and we tried it a few times. But then it became clear that the sheer amount of stuff going on, there's literally every corner of the frame, there's some other thing happening. And what we also found was that there was a bit of a lag in terms of them giving us an update and then us being able to kind of render it in the farm. So we got into all these kind of conversations about why aren't we seeing this or why aren't we seeing that. So we kind of decided to kind of split the world into sort of areas. This sort of bad map here is how we kind of zoned up the universe we were shooting in. So we could just kind of stick to one area at a time, which meant Brian's team at 343 could kind of concentrate on one of those areas in terms of updating animation. And we knew when we got an update, it would just be like the purple zone or the yellow zone or the blue zone. That helped a lot in terms of kind of managing the chaos that kind of ensued. The only thing about the pipeline was the sort of idea of an iterative workflow was really important. So it's important for 343 because they had to get render feedback. At a certain point, animators need to see a render because as soon as you light something properly and it's got proper contact shadows, etc., it's got a different kind of feeling of weight than just looking at an OpenGL playblast. So it was quite important, I think, for them to get feedback. So we kind of agreed this approach where maybe 4 or 5 times through the project, we'd give them a kind of significant render update, then they'd give us an animation update based on that render. I think that actually ended up being so successful, I think we ended up doing more like kind of sort of 10 times during the project. But yeah, it worked kind of well. The other thing we looked at was the procedural environment creation, which we come up with, and I'll go into that a little bit later on. So in order to kind of create this environment, we ended up doing most of it procedurally, and that caused some issues with asset placement because we were displacing the terrain and giving us the height sort of varied, and therefore people weren't where they should have been on top of the land. And from an internal point of view, that kind of very iterative way of doing it allowed us just to kind of throw things into the scene and fix it as we went. We weren't quite so concerned about, we need to get everything right and then render it. It was just like, we're going to be rendering this thing constantly over and over again, so let's just get stuff in there. If it's broken, we'll fix it as we go. And there's a lot of versions for this scene. I think when I was looking through the whip stuff, the version 168 of this scene. So I don't think we're all full versions, but we certainly iterated a lot. So in terms of what we're getting from 343, let's turn the sound down on that one. So this is just going to take you through a quick, it's not the whole sequence again, it's just a little bit of it showing you, each iteration from 343, things would be kind of evolved. So obviously we've gone from kind of Lego figures to proper assets now, no facial animation yet. And then we're coming in with actual kind of, this is probably close to the final pass we got where they've all got kind of proper, really nice facial animation. And the same thing on the downhill sequence, where again we're going to start with the kind of Lego guys. And this one, it's hard. There's so much going on in this scene. I mean, it was a nightmare to review it because literally there's so much happening in every kind of bit of the frame that you're having to really, really watch it carefully to see what's been updated. And even watching this video, occasionally it'll kind of wipe to a kind of updated version, and it's sometimes actually quite difficult to see everything that's kind of different or been updated in the later versions. So we eventually got to the point where like all those cube guys had kind of gone, and it was more about just kind of fine-tuning the weight and timing of things. Yeah, so this next thing I want to talk about was the kind of procedural environment. So one of the big problems we identified early on was we had this huge amount of terrain we needed to cover, and there was no way we were going to do that as a kind of hand-built asset. So Sergio Cares, who's our kind of lead CG soup, who's a bit of a mad genius, decided he was going to build it all procedurally in Houdini, which was not great. Generally when Serge says he's going to do something, you kind of trust that it's going to be amazing, and he was true to his word. So Serge created an entirely new atmospheric scattering shader, volumetric cloud system, a whole bunch of kind of VOP and SOP-based networks in Houdini for making what was a very low-res kind of feeling terrain into something that looked, totally like it was made out of rock, snow, and ice. And that involved a whole bunch of both SOP networks, which work in geometry level, and VOP networks, which work at the shading level. I'll show you quickly some of those tests. This is some very early tests for the scattering shader we wrote. So basically, this works. It kind of mimics the kind of curvature of the Earth and the way light kind of comes through. Oops, sorry, I'm going to go back a. Sorry. Yeah, it mimics the fact that the curvature of the Earth and the thickness of the atmosphere actually modifies how light transmits through the atmosphere, and it kind of works from ground level all the way up to kind of planetary level. This was the first test on the volumetric clouds we did. So all of these clouds are completely procedural, properly volumetric. So this is the kind of first test of that. You can see this is the actual terrain we got given by 343. You can see, from the closeness we are to it, it's really kind of low resolution. And then this is another version where we kind of turned on the atmospheric scattering. So you can see, particularly, there's a couple of moments later on, we shoot right into the sun. You get this really nice kind of golden sort of light tint to it, which everybody kind of loved. So I'll just jump on from that. So the next quick one is just to kind of show you the similar sort of stuff on the terrain. So these were the first renders that Serge did of the kind of terrain shader he built, which again, he's just layering lots and lots of noises that all kind of interact with each other. And we've also got functions in our shaders that can compute variables for things like height, slope, local curvature, occlusion. So all those are kind of mixed together. So for instance, we can keep the snow in the kind of generally the kind of higher horizontal areas. We can build extra rock detail into kind of vertical areas. So this is the same geometry you saw in the atmospheric tests. This is just with all those shaders kind of applied to it. And you can see there's a good example there of somebody kind of literally going through the landscape, which was the only unfortunate result of taking that approach. We kind of fixed that fairly easily just by moving assets about. So the next big, I guess, segment of this is an FX and simulation, of which there was literally hundreds and hundreds. I'm only going to show you a small subsection of this, because literally we'd be here for days if I showed you all of it. So as I said before, we broke the scene down into kind of key effects moments, and then the FX team started R&Ding in those almost immediately. Almost everything was kind of sound in Houdini. Occasionally we'd take kind of noise-based routes where that made more sense. And then once that R&D work had progressed to a point where it kind of been reviewed successfully, the guys would kind of take a fork of the master scene and start applying those effects in scene. And then once those elements approved, they'd save their effects thing out as an HDA, or Houdini digital asset, and that would actually be reintegrated into the master scene. So essentially, the way we approached this was actually everything was rendered in one scene. We weren't rendering all these things as separate elements. We were actually just rendering them all in one kind of master scene, which got a bit crazy after a while. So this is some early R&D and explosions. We knew we were going to have lots and lots of weapons fire and explosions, and they had to interact with snow. So there's lots of kind of tests to get the right kind of feeling for how an explosion should react with the kind of snow layer. And we started kind of, this is when they started kind of implementing them in scene. This is more sort of general sort of snow interaction. So this is, I think, Hudson larking about with backflips to kind of get some first tests. Snow was actually quite difficult. I think we threw every kind of simulation tool Houdini had at this. We had flip solvers and sand solvers, standard kind of volume fluids, all sorts of things. And it was quite difficult to get the consistency right. I think this is a good test here. It often ended up looking quite slushy or too powdery. And it was actually quite tricky to get all that stuff to kind of blend and actually look more kind of natural, getting closer to it there. Sometimes some nice happy actions. The other problem we had with the snow was, you know, it would throw up lots of stuff in front of the camera, and sometimes that looked great, and sometimes that basically totally obscured what we were trying to see. So that was another thing we had to kind of fix as we went along. So basic kind of thruster tests. Again, these were kind of simulated using a little pyro tool we've got for doing kind of usually used for spaceship thrusters. Shields, there's a long history of kind of Covenant spacecraft and Halo having these very definitive looking shields, so we had to make sure this stuff kind of merged with previous attempts to do that by kind of other studios. And this is all automated, it all kind of reacts to incoming weapons fire, so literally you can kind of shoot bullets at these things and those shields will kind of react on their own. Another one here, this is the sort of platform that shatters and almost falls on top of the guys as they fly past. So this was a kind of classic Voronoi fracture sim that then drove a whole bunch of sub-sims to deal with kind of secondary debris and smoke and dust. And again, you're going to see the kind of iterations in this. We played around a little bit with how close it got to them. So this is the kind of secondary kind of smoke sim that I think really sold the thing, and lots of tiny little bits of debris. And this was a kind of really rough version of how that started to look in scene. This was definitely the hardest effect I think we had. This sort of massive cruiser smacks into the ground at a key point. The animation in this was probably the most difficult aspect. Just getting the feeling of weight and feeling of impact in that ship was quite difficult without going really crazy. And we couldn't, I mean, there was obviously ways to do this in more sophisticated ways that we just didn't have time for. So it was a case of somebody kind of trying to hand animate that to a certain extent, and then we just apply a whole bunch of different layered sims around that moment. And we went back later on and put, you know, fire coming out the back of it and smoke and bits of debris coming off it and all that kind of stuff as well. Another big one was a sort of ground pound action. This was a new player ability they wanted to show off, and some good examples here of trying to get the right amount of stuff. Like, it was way too much stuff there. That's me more the right amount of stuff. And you know, every time we do one of these sims, it would throw up some different result in terms of how much stuff went over camera that we needed to kind of fine-tune a bit. Just going to quickly also talk about motion graphics and UI. This is one of these things which I think often gets very kind of overlooked, but actually a huge amount of work goes into these. I'll just play this when I'm talking. So Halo fans apparently will freeze frame this stuff once they release these trailers and look, you know, totally scrutinize it for Easter eggs. So literally everything we write in one of these things has to get kind of scrutinized by the franchise team and make sure that if they want Easter eggs, they're in there, and if they don't want them, we haven't put them in by accident. There's a little breakdown to come up next, just to show you a little evolution of how we kind of developed some of this stuff. So 343 kind of gave us a kind of, you know, basic starting point. Then we just started developing how the flow and structure of this thing would work, just using kind of colored squares and stuff. And then that started becoming a bit more sophisticated once we kind of got the proper animated graphics in there. And then this kind of final layer, I think it's pretty close to the final one, where all these little bits and pieces are animated. There's just like, you know, so much going on in these things. And, you know, I think it's almost a shame, because like, if you aren't freeze-framing, you probably miss half of it, and there's some really lovely work in there. Yeah, so the biggest part of the solution was definitely the kind of rendering. So as I said before, we took this approach where rather than compositing lots and lots of layers, with the issues that volumetrics would give us. We decided madly, I think, to integrate everything we were doing into one master scene and render that. Lighting was kind of straightforward, actually, because Serge's kind of atmosphere shader pretty much did all of that on its own. So we didn't have to worry too much about lighting, apart from watching which bits of the mountain were casting shadows over where the characters were. And we just constantly re-rendered that scene. I think that scene was on the farm non-stop for about 4 months, over and over and over again. So it took about 3 days maybe to render the whole thing. And we got through about 168 comped versions of it eventually. As I said before, just fixing it as we go meant we could get lots of feedback to 343 that they was great for them. This is very quickly. So this is a quick evolution of how the lighting. So this is the first time we're rendering it. Then this is kind of somewhere in the middle where we're maybe rendering it half res. Sometimes we'll only render every 5th or 10th frame if that gets us through it quicker. You can start to see more of the effects going in here, even though it's still pretty grainy. And then this is getting kind of closer to final. And then yeah, you can see that's pretty much almost final at this point. And as I've kept you in tenterhooks long enough, so this is the final result for those who haven't seen it. I'll put the sign up for this one.
Team Osiris. Over the last 72 hours, 5 colonies have experienced identical events. Massive destruction, Forerunner in origin. And Dr. Catherine Elizabeth Halsey has managed to contact us. She claims to have information on these attacks.
Halsey is currently in Covenant custody on the surface of Kamchatka. Your mission is to insert behind enemy lines, retrieve Halsey, and bring her back to Infinity. Be advised, Dr. Halsey is accompanied by Covenant Supreme Leader Jewel Mdama. If you have the opportunity...
Understood, Commander.
Good luck, Spartan Locke. Infinity out.
Tracking gear online.
Affirmative. Say, before we make this jump, anybody want to say a few words?
I figure if God can hear how scared I am, so can everyone else. Locke, you buying the first drink when we're done?
You ask, you buy. Fire Team Osiris, the light is green.
Comms working fine, Locke.
Copy that, Tanaka. Spartan Buck online and ready.
Spartan Vale online.
Weapons free. Contact!
Get the Xbox One limited edition bundle.
So if that doesn't make you want to go and play the game, I'm not quite sure what will. Free advert from Microsoft at the end there. We got enough time? There's a little... I can fly this really quickly. We got a little bit at the end, which is just about another scene, which is more about kind of performance capture, where we had to basically create a new version of Katana, who was a very kind of well-known Halo character. So basically the idea was that she was going to become this kind of physical presence for the first time. So we went through a whole bunch of iterations on designing a kind of new look for Katana for when she appeared in that physical form. Yeah, it's a quick, this more traditional approach, I guess, in terms of kind of, a storyboarding, then kind of ending up kind of doing a kind of the classical kind of performance capture. So this kind of morphs into a kind of performance capture edit.
No. The mantle of responsibility belongs to Katana and her people.
Focus fire.
You will not betray her!
Enough!
Done. I failed you.
He is the last person I need protection from. Hello, John. It's good to see you.
You've changed.
It was time.
That's obviously sort of nude Cortana there, rather than her final
I
representation.
know we have a disagreement, but once you understand my plan...
Your plan is we do what you say.
I'm offering people a chance to be more than they are naturally.
Like Dr. Halsey did for me.
Cool. So, just a very quick test. So the part of that's kind of facial capture pipelines. You can kind of see those kind of weird cameras that Jem is wearing in her face. We kind of get a stereo view of all those kind of dots that get painted on them, and then that gets turned by the guys at Profile, actually, who did the performance capture. They've got their own pipeline for doing this. And that's the kind of end result. It's actually pretty accurate. Sometimes the results don't always work for the character asset we've got exactly. Smiles especially tend to be very difficult to pull off. We've got pretty good results, and they supply us back a rig that's animated, so we can always go and tweak it after the fact. So this was the final. I'll maybe come back to that if we've got time after questions. Huge thanks, 343 Industries and Microsoft Studios, who are awesome clients. I'm not just saying that. They're great guys to work for. Brian Goodrich and the cinematic team at 343 especially. Of course, my wonderful team back at Axis, who actually made all of this happen. I get the credit, they did the work. And of course, team at FMX for inviting me, and thanks everybody here for coming and listening. Any questions? Thanks.
Please raise your hand so I can see you. Hello, and
Hello.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a more technical question. You were talking about the different approaches for the snow, that you tried different stuff. Was it in the end then a combination or something new?
I think
or
a lot of sims ended up being because when you chuck lots of snow up, you get what almost looks like smoke. It's not quite. It's a very, very fine layer, but you also get bits of stuff as well. So we found that each simulation type tended to give us a particular look. It was very hard to get that kind of variation, just using the sand solver, for instance. So yeah, we mixed that up a bit. I think there's always things you can improve. I think that's definitely one of those areas I wish we had another couple of months to do R&D in that stuff. But I'm probably not the best. I kind of know enough to kind of know roughly what's going on. But when it comes to particularly the DOP stuff in Hoodie, I'm like, yeah, okay, some magic stuff happens over there, and I see the end results. But yeah, but we used a lot of the different types of simulation engine.
Next question over here.
Hi. I was wondering what kind of software you use to put that master scene together and what you rendered in.
It's all Houdini. I mean, well, I say it's all Houdini. So our pipeline's very much, it's all Maya-centric for animation, and all of that data gets cached out to Alembic and brought into Houdini through various kind of custom Houdini assets we've written, and it all gets rendered in Mantra. So we pretty much use Mantra, which is Houdini's native renderer for everything. I mean, there's literally terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of sims going into that sequence. I only showed you a small subset of all the stuff we actually had. And it copes with it. I mean, Mantra is great for that stuff. You know, we had to increase the RAM on the render farm machines a bit, I think. It did actually. I mean, everything's coming in as delayed read objects, so it's only getting loaded into the scene when it's actually going to get rendered, which makes it more efficient. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of custom stuff we've written within Houdini, but it's all still Houdini at the end of the day. So.
Other questions? What in the back?
How did you actually add realism to the camera movements?
That's a great question. So for the main scene I showed you, this is a conversation myself and Brian had often about what we liked in camera work and what style of camera we were going for. It's one of the things I still am quite hands-on about. For most of the work we do, I tend to like to animate my own cameras because I find that's a very personal kind of, how you feel the framing is very personal. But we spend a lot of time, occasionally we will look at kind of actually capturing proper physical cameras, where a lot of that stuff, it's just carefully animated, and it's animated in a way where you're aware of what a physical camera would do. So you're not trying to get it to do, obviously, the big downhill move is a crazy camera move. There's no getting away from it. But we're still trying to imbue it with a sense of it having some weight and the kind of frequency of the kind of shake it's got. And I guess making it feel operated is the most important thing. It's kind of, if you've got that kind of handheld camera of it reacting to events, not leading them, that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a huge amount of thought went into, not just for that scene, but all the scenes into the actual kind of camera work involved. And that also progressed to things like rendering, like making sure we get nice lens flares and little aberrations in the camera lens and all that kind of stuff. I think there's definitely an argument, I think, for CG, for pure CG stuff especially, kind of those slightly shaky handheld cameras always work better because they give you, it just makes it feel a bit more organic. But I think generally you've always got to watch cameras in CG, because you can very easily kind of do things that a kind of real camera wouldn't do. So.
I have a question. Between, my palms get sweaty when I hear animating there, putting it together and rendering here.
Yeah, ours did too. Yeah.
And you say there were 10 iterations. What was like an average turnover time for each?
I think the farm, too, it's about, I think, we split it into sort of three, I mean, they weren't hard cuts, but we split it into sort of three sections in terms of time. So I think each of those three sections, which was about 2,000 frames, took about 3 days in the farm. So to render the whole thing was about a week. So we started rendering it, I think the first test went on in February, and we were rendering it pretty much non-stop until July. And it's just like every now and again, we compile a version and send it to Microsoft in 343. And the only problem it caused was this, when they sent us an update, it was usually about a week lag before they got the results of that update back. So even though we might be showing them an update because we wanted to show them something else, like, oh, here's a new effect we've done, have a look at that, and they start complaining, oh, but that character's not where I put them, and we got used to that, I think, after a while, in terms of, that there was going to be a bit of a delay when they gave us stuff, when they get it back.
Great. You got to raise your hands for other questions. Anyone? Then, thank you for a fantastic talk.
Thank you.